over about a 2-day period there, all of United Healthcare's insurance operations, all of Optum's operations, and they're the kind of provider arm of United Health Group. All of those were down.
Welcome to the Business of Healthcare podcast. From the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management at the University of Texas at Dallas, Naveen Jindal School of Management. Here at UT Dallas, we bring together business heads and other thought leaders to help navigate the challenges of our rapidly changing, increasingly complex healthcare ecosystem. I'm your host, Professor Dan Karnuta, Director of the UT Dallas Professional Program in Healthcare Management. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. You can also join us online at businessofhealthcarepodcast.com. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the significant cyber attack on Change Healthcare, which has had a crippling effect on the business of healthcare and its customers and patients, and also injected a shot of adrenaline into the already important issue of safeguarding patient data and business continuity processes in the healthcare industry. Today, our guest is Nick Hutt. Nick is senior editor for HFMA, which is the Healthcare Financial Management Association. Nick, welcome to the Business of Healthcare podcast. Could at first here just tell us a little bit about HFMA and your role there?
Well, thanks, Dan. Very glad to be able to join you. Yeah, I work on the content team at HFMA. As you said, the Healthcare Financial Management Association, a membership group for healthcare finance professionals, mostly working in the hospital and health system setting. And my role is to help develop some of the content on policy news, regulatory news and trends, and also just do some, as warranted, a deeper dive from time to time into some of the issues that are affecting our membership. I also appear on a separate podcast that HFMA sponsors called Voices in Healthcare Finance, a biweekly podcast that folks can hear, wherever they get their podcasts. So always stay busy, and it's always interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. And for our listeners out there, if you don't already subscribe to the newsletter for HFMA, it's a great way to just keep up to date with healthcare trends. So, Nick, let's start our discussion, our Change Healthcare discussion, with just a little discussion of the greater issue, which is one that most of us can relate to personally, and that's the data breach. It seems like every few months I get another letter in the mail from a financial institution or a healthcare institution that I deal with. And I open the letter and it says, we've had a breach and your data, maybe out there on the dark web. Sorry about that. Here's a couple years worth of Experian credit monitoring free for you. But other than that, sorry. And so we've all witnessed that. So why is healthcare data now being targeted by these hackers?
Yeah, if you could take those years of credit monitoring that they offer and stack them on top of each other, you'd probably be set for life, because you're right, these letters are becoming more and more common. Of course, you can't do that. So it doesn't, it's not as much of an advantage as it possibly could be. But yeah, healthcare data is really valuable. It's extremely personal. It's sort of central to the operation of these facilities, these hospitals and health systems that are integral to their communities. They cannot shut down as a result of a ransomware attack. They have to keep going to the best they can. And therefore, that makes them all that much more of an attraction to these cyber criminals, these ransomware gangs. Also, healthcare has lagged some other industries, for example, the energy sector, in its cyber defenses, partly because those industries were targeted earlier. So they had more of an impetus to shore up their systems earlier than healthcare did. Another issue, I think, is just the sheer volume of data that healthcare organizations are working with. Patient data, often, in the cases of a lot of organizations, many thousands of patients. It's just a flood of data. And the more you have, generally, the more vulnerable you are.
So this large volume of healthcare data, it's flowing back and forth between healthcare providers being the hospitals and physicians and other entities that actually provide the healthcare service, and the insurance companies. And there is a lot of data that flows back and forth. So what is Change Healthcare, and how do they fit into all that process?
So first of all, Change Healthcare has more than 100 services that they offer to customers. But the biggest one, or the biggest couple, I think, for the purposes of this episode, is they provide transmission of claims from providers to payers, meaning when providers furnish a service to a patient and they're going to bill that patient's insurance, they send the claim through Change Healthcare to the payer. And then they also provide transmission, that Change Healthcare does payments back the other way from payers to providers. So if you're a provider, you can theoretically connect to Change Healthcare and know that all of your claims routing to all your different payers is going to happen smoothly and seamlessly. At least that's the idea. And that's the way it worked, and a lot of people maybe took it for granted up until this incident in question. Many other services that they offer, like I mentioned, but when that two-way transmission of claims and payments was halted, it really left a lot of providers in a bind just because they could not be compensated for services they were offering over about a 3-week stretch, at least to the extent that they sent services for those claims through Change Healthcare.
So we got Change Healthcare is essentially the pipeline that that transfers the healthcare claim or the bill from the provider to whoever's going to pay it, an insurance company. And those claims couldn't get through. And providers, their processes were all built around that funnel being there. And this hack essentially shut that down. There's other things going through that pipeline as well, such as prior authorizations. It's a funnel that helps providers ask for permission from the payers to actually perform a service for the patient. So we've got a situation here where Change Healthcare has customers, which largely are providers, healthcare providers, hospitals, physician groups, but they also affect us, the patient. Because now consider yourself sitting at your doctor's office and wanting to have a procedure performed. They call up their system and say, well, what's the insurance? This person has this type of insurance. Can we provide, will the payer pay for this procedure for this patient? And the provider can't get that information, can't get that authorization from the insurance company that, yes, this is a member of our insurance company policy because the system's down. Change Healthcare system is down. Or you're waiting for a procedure to be done, an operation to be performed that you need, and you're waiting for prior authorization from that insurance company to permit your provider to perform that procedure on you, and you can't have the procedure done because the prior authorization is not being approved because it can't get to the insurance company to improve it because this pipeline, this Change Healthcare pipeline, has been shut down. So it's not just the providers that are being impacted, but it's also us, the patients, that are being impacted. So back to you, Nick. So what happened? The Change Healthcare hack. What's the skeleton format of what happened there?
Well, first of all, yeah, you made a great point just then, because another one of their kind of core services is insurance verification, eligibility verification. So when that gets shut down, exactly, you can't confirm whether a patient is insured or not, and that's another thing that really kind of stymied the entire healthcare administrative infrastructure, at least for customers of Change Healthcare. So what happened? The attack happened on February 21st of this year, 2024. It was coordinated by an overseas cyber gang that goes by Black Cat, or ALPH-V, ALPH-V. About 9 days before the attack kind of manifested, they gained access to a server of Change Healthcare that it turned out did not have multi-factor authentication, which is a really basic line of defense that basically every server in every industry, every company should have these days. This was, and we can get into this as well, but Change Healthcare had been bought by a major healthcare conglomerate, United Health Group, which took steps to ensure that all servers of legacy servers of Change Healthcare did have multi-factor authentication, but this one, for whatever reason, had fallen through the cracks. So yeah, again, this Black Cat gang, for a while, it seemed like they were the ones that actually did the attack, that actually took the steps of penetrating the server and wreaking havoc from there. But it turned out that they had coordinated with a smaller outfit that had actually conducted the attack and Black Hat was kind of just the organizer, the kind of the supervisor for this activity.
So we've got Change Healthcare that's owned by the biggest healthcare insurance company in the country, United Health Group. What did United and Change Healthcare do when they realized this attack had happened?
So the first thing they did, what was out of an abundance of caution, and in hindsight, maybe an excessive amount of caution, but you can understand what they were thinking at the time. It was just important to really get on top of the problem. They actually disconnected all United Health Group operations while they worked to pinpoint the source of the breach. So over about a 2-day period there, all of United Healthcare's insurance operations, all of Optum's operations, and they're the kind of provider arm of United Health Group, all of those were down. And then after that, after a couple of days, it was up to providers whether they wanted to reconnect to all United Health systems, aside from Change Healthcare, which was down. Most of their services were down until mid-March. So just a tumultuous time. After that, United and Change set about trying to repair their systems. That process is just about complete as we speak. In earlier mid-July here is to some degree still a work in progress, but by mid-March, about 3 weeks after the attack, that's when they finally got payments back flowing through the system. So providers could be compensated for claims that had been in transit en route at the time of the attack. A week or so after that, around the 3rd to 4th week of March, roughly a month after the attack, they started to get claims moving again. So claims transmission was once again available. But it was not a matter of, turning the faucet back on and everything going back to normal. It was, you could say, more like a drip, 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 where a few payers here and there were brought back online at any given time.
And Change Healthcare's customers, so the providers, what was their initial reaction?
So first of all, just for context, the impact of this attack was significant operationally and financially. There were horror stories, especially about smaller providers like physician practices, the owners, the physicians having to pay out of their pocket for a lot of aspects of their operation, like to pay their front office staff, for example. Strata Decision Technology, which is one of the leading revenue cycle vendors in the industry, found that gaps in expected revenue for Q1 2024, which is, of course, a quarter when the attack took place, the deficit there ranged from 16.5% to 17.9% in terms of the fall off from expected revenue. So almost 18% in some cases in terms of the revenue fall off. That range varied depending on how your hospital would be categorized by size. For the smallest hospitals, including rural hospitals, the shortfall was 17.1%. And those are the ones with the least amount of cushion to deal with this type of emergency. And for those hospitals in March, which was the first full month after the attack, the revenue reduction, again, compared with your expected intake, was more than 20%. So trying times for sure. Steps that they took to try to keep going, to try to keep themselves whole to whatever degree possible. First of all, they disconnected and then began reconnecting when they assessed that it was safe to do so. They started implementing manual processes as best they could, trying to send claims directly to payers if the payers provided that option, or finding other options to use as clearinghouses, alternatives to Change Healthcare. Some who used Change Healthcare from the start already had a diverse group of clearinghouses, but many had to scramble to make those connections and hope that their payer partners would either connect to that new clearinghouse if they weren't already, or set up an easy direct connection. But even, when those workarounds work, providers still had to send claims to multiple different payers. And if claims filing needed to take place by paper, as was the case in some instances, they first of all had to hope their payer partners even accepted paper claims to start with. And that's just a lot of manual work, a lot of overtime for folks during an era when labor costs are already kind of a drag on a lot of providers' financial outlook. So For example, we HFMA helped conduct a survey in mid-March of more than 120 health system finance leaders, and 83% of those said they were incurring additional costs from manual processes or from new technology investments. So just a scramble and required a lot of resilience, a lot of ingenuity.
So think about this. You're a provider and you're going about your business and all of a sudden this happens and your pipeline that submits your claims to the payers who are going to pay you is essentially shut off. Your initial reaction there's a cyber attack here, and so you actually disconnect from your end. You don't want anything to do with Change Healthcare right now because you don't want any of the cyber issue attacking your data. So you cut off that funnel, and it results. The cyber attack results in essentially you receiving what you're saying 20% less revenue than you were expecting for the quarter, for the month, and you've got staff to pay, you have vendors to pay, and you have 20% less revenue coming in. That's what these providers were facing, and you've got United on their side saying, we're trying to fix this as quickly as we can, the Change Healthcare cyber issue here, and get the systems back up and running. So you providers just figure out some other way to do it. Use some other funnel, some company that Change Healthcare is not the only company that provides this type of gateway between providers and payers. So use another one of those. Use manual processes. Figure it out. Connect directly to other payers. But the problem with that is you're a provider and you've got processes and systems in place that your people are dealing with. And making those changes in business processes, that takes time. It's not easy. And so providers really did not have a quick way to fix this, which is why their revenue was dropping as the claims couldn't go through to get paid. So it's one thing to say, just put a workaround in place. It's another one to expect these providers to be able to do it. So, we've got a big problem here. What was United Healthcare's or United Health Group's, what was their reaction, or what did they do to try to help the providers that were affected by this cyber attack?
One thing they did over the first few weeks after the attack was to get their loan program in proper working condition. In kind of the mayhem of the initial days after the attack, the first couple of weeks, they did not implement any sort of viable terms and conditions for the loans that they were offering to providers. The loan in those first days, it was only meant to cover payments that were frozen en route from payers to providers in Change Healthcare system at the time of the attack. But that did not speak to the shortfall from all the claims that providers were not able to file in the first place. Another issue with the loan program at the outset was you had 5 days to repay the loan to Optum. Optum was the arm of United Health Group through which the loan was actually being made available. 5 days is just outrageous under the circumstances. It wasn't practical in the least. So over time, in response to feedback, the loan program became much more viable, much more tenable. And now providers, they're eligible for larger sums of money that better reflect the true cash flow impact they've incurred. And they haven't had to repay the loan until 45 days after they are able to self-attest that their cash flow is back to normal. One thing to note about, how things transpired in the days after the attack from the point of view of United Health Group and dealing with this cyber gang is that they paid a $22 million ransom in Bitcoin. They paid off Black Cat. And I mentioned Black Cat. It turned out actually had a partner in all this. Black Cat did not share the money with their partners. They kept all the money and went dark. Like no one can find them, not the authorities, not anybody at this point. And then their partner, kind of feeling guilted about this whole thing, they took the files. They had possession of the files the whole time. Those files had protected health information, personally identifiable information like addresses, social security numbers of potentially tens of millions of Americans, and handed off those files to another ransomware gang. And that gang has posted some of those files on the dark web, a sampling of those files. So turns out that hefty ransom payment basically was for nothing.
So we've got United Healthcare that's paid a $22 million ransom to the hackers. Meanwhile, United is rebuilding their systems to try to get Change Healthcare back up and running in proper fashion. And United is offering loans to impacted providers to help them through this cash flow crisis, if you will. What were other payers doing? I mean, you got United's certainly a big payer, the biggest healthcare payer in the country, but there are other large payers. Most payers were impacted by this. Were they doing anything to help providers?
Well, so the largest payer of all is Medicare through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They made Medicare advance payments available via loan program to providers. That amount was based on a 1 month average of the value of a provider's claims during a set period in 2023. That's how that amount was determined. But the catch there, and there's a catch with loans most generally in all walks of life, is that CMS immediately began withholding Medicare payments once you accepted that loan until the loan was paid off. And if after 90 days you still have an outstanding balance, for a lot of providers, that time came around mid-June, then you were going to receive a letter not so gently requesting that you pay off the remaining amount. And that amount also is subject to generating interest. Many other private payers, private insurers, as you mentioned, all United Health Group, on all CMS and Medicare could do really was to strongly encourage those payers to make loans available to their provider partners as needed. There's nothing they could do to compel them to do so. And needless to say, there was some variation in just how accommodating some of those other payers were in trying to help their provider partners get through this difficult period.
This episode is brought to you by the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, the definitive resource for healthcare management education in North Texas. The center is based in the Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. It plays a unique role in training the next generation of healthcare leaders to meet local, regional, and national demands. The Jindal School uses its strengths in accounting, administration, finance, marketing, and information systems to educate highly qualified personnel for healthcare administration and executive leadership positions. The center is home to 7 healthcare leadership and management programs, including undergraduate and graduate programs, as well as executive programs for physicians and working professionals. For more information, visit us online at jindal.utdallas.edu/healthcare.
So we've got CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Medicare and Medicaid government payments for healthcare beneficiaries is over half of the healthcare spending in the country comes from Medicare and Medicaid patients. So a lot of these invoices, these claims that weren't getting through from the provider to the payer was actually the government, Medicare and Medicaid. And the government has the ability to unilaterally say, okay, we understand these claims aren't getting to us. We normally would be paying the providers for these claims, but we're not because we don't have the claims. We can't verify the claims. So we will loan money to providers under the assumption that, well, we would have paid these claims had they been here. And then when the claims come in, we're just not going to pay them because we've already loaned you the money. Okay, so the government tried to do something there to help the providers. Other payers, however, like you just said, Nick, they've got no pressure and no legal requirement to actually advance any money to the providers. So these payers, these commercial payers, aren't having to pay their cash flow to the providers because the claims aren't coming in. So they're being able to hold their cash while the providers are sitting there saying, we need money to run our businesses. So you got an issue there. The federal government can very quickly say, we will advance the providers' payments, but the private insurance companies don't have that requirement, which is a bigger issue for another podcast discussion on all of our healthcare mechanics in the country. So United Health is trying to do some things through loans to the providers, and CMS, the government, is trying to help the providers in a loan type of an arrangement. What's next? Okay, so now we've got We kind of understand what happened here. It's currently being fixed. Things are going to get back to normal. But what's next as far as any legislation that's coming from Congress? I mean, they've seen this. They're watching this as well. Any lawsuits against United, Optum, Change Healthcare? What's happening in that realm, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few developments to watch for in the upcoming months and years. You mentioned legislation, bills that are being drafted that largely focus on ensuring that providers have minimum cybersecurity standards to try to make sure they're able to withstand the type of attacks that can really cause a lot of chaos throughout the health system. Obviously, this was an attack on a third-party vendor. Whatever defenses providers might have had didn't do any good. But there's still just more attention being paid now to make sure everybody is in the strongest possible position. Obviously, it's a situation where the criminals are often a step ahead, but still, policymakers want to do everything in their power to ensure that healthcare stakeholders are in as strong and secure of a position as possible. So, for example, there's a bill that would condition future Medicare advance payments, like the ones we just talked about, being made available in the wake of this attack. Those would be available to providers after a cyber attack only if they meet established standards for cybersecurity. And this is a bipartisan issue. So my hunch is something's going to get done. The lame duck session at the end of the congressional term coming up at the end of this calendar year is a time to watch for, where something might generate enough momentum to actually get passed, which is a rarity in Congress these days. You also noted that there are lawsuits in the wake of this attack. The lawsuits have been filed by several dozen, at least, by providers who were hamstrung financially as a result of the attack, and from consumers whose protected health information was exposed. And also, I think you touched on this earlier as well, consumers, were left by the side of the road in some cases, unable to get the health care that they were counting on because of this whole disruption. So, interestingly, there was a ruling by an agency of the federal judiciary system, and their whole reason for existence is to decide whether cases stemming from one incident or one situation like this should be combined. And in a move that I think some court watchers found a little bit surprising, they ruled that consumer and provider lawsuits, about 50 all told, should be combined together, even though, you might think of those groups as having different perspectives on the situation, what transpired, and how they were affected by it. But regardless, those lawsuits, like I said, about 50 all told, will be brought together before a federal district court in Minnesota. And that site was chosen because it is the location of United Health Group's international corporate headquarters.
So let's talk about us, the patients. What's next for us? Our data has been put at risk here, probably breached. And United Health Group's CEO recently said something to the effect that a third of healthcare claims flow through Change Healthcare. So, roughly at least a third of us in the country have been impacted by this, our data. What's next for us? Are we about to get a letter from somebody again saying that, sorry, here's a year's worth of credit monitoring, but your data's out there on the dark web?
Very possibly. Yeah, very possibly. Like you said, it's about a 1 in 3 chance that any of us will be getting that letter. And yeah, Andrew Whitty, the CEO of United Health, gave that estimate most recently during a congressional hearing in early May. And so that would, if it's a third of all Americans, that's tens of millions of people at least. So one of the accommodations that United Health did promise to make pretty much from the outset was to handle breach notifications for customers of all the providers and payers that have been impacted by this outage, because failure to make notification in a timely manner would otherwise leave, any given provider or payer at risk of substantial penalties from the Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Not to mention a lot of negative press and publicity. So United Health said it would coordinate that breach notification process. And in fact, starting in mid-June, it began outreach to providers and insurers whose customer information is assessed to have been exposed based on the forensic investigation that's been ongoing. United Health Group partnered with some leading industry companies that engage in this sort of process and help try to pinpoint exactly what's going on with a cyber attack. So specifically, what United Health Group did for its customers was to provide a link to a statement that any organization, any provider, any insurer, any other healthcare company that's been affected or that has customers who have been affected, they can post this link on their own websites, giving their consumers the full rundown as far as what's happened, what risks they're facing, what their options are as far as that credit monitoring that you referred to. And as far as written notices to consumers, which is kind of the most direct type of outreach, they're going to be starting that. I think they said toward the end of July, but there's undoubtedly going to be some gaps based on not being able to reach everybody, not having up-to-date addresses for everybody potentially. Again, we're talking millions and millions of people, but providers should be covered as far as the regulatory side of this if they post that link, unless they've chosen to opt out and take their own steps.
Interesting. So just procedurally, we, the patients, we are patients of our provider, of our hospital, of our physician group, whoever the provider is that's been impacted by this. So it's really their responsibility to notify us that our data has been breached. But it's United Health Group through Change Healthcare that has the information, the data to say who actually has been impacted, what patients have been impacted by this. So the provider's hands are sort of tied. They've got a responsibility to notify us, but they can't because they don't really know who has been impacted, which patients have been impacted by this. So the government has allowed, in this case, that requirement to notify the patients to be United Health Group responsibility, not the providers. As long as the providers, refer to this link, this website, to say that we're taking advantage of this ruling that says United's going to be on the hook for contacting any impacted patients. So I guess a third of us can expect a letter from United Health Group or Change Healthcare in the very near future. So let's conclude by just talking about any lessons learned for the industry. So this was a serious attack. It crippled a lot of provider organizations. It impacted us, the patients. Are we seeing that anything's been learned from this at this early stage post-event?
I think so. And yeah, you would hope there are some lessons to be gleaned from this whole incident and applied to improve industry processes and procedures going forward. That might be a silver lining from stress and strain of this entire attack. So one lesson I think applies to steps that providers can take to ensure business continuity if an event like this happens, because Change Healthcare, some of their legacy contracts before they were acquired by United Health Group, those contracts had exclusivity clauses. So you could not, if you were going to do business with them, you could not also use other of these pipelines, these data exchanges. And for optimal resilience in situations like this, it's definitely advisable to have multiple options, so you can keep operating to a degree, at least if the worst case scenario plays out. If some providers had that already, but if some chose not to, some didn't really think about it, and if you had signed some of these legacy contracts that Change Healthcare and wanted to do business with them, you couldn't use other outlets. But now United Health Group promises that those exclusivity clauses are a thing of the past. They're being removed from contracts. And I'm sure that standard operating procedure is going to be in the future to have some of that redundancy built in, where you have different pipelines that you can use at any given time.
Yeah. And, interestingly, United Health Group recently in their earnings call for the quarter talked about this having a significant impact on their profitability, about $1 to $2 billion of negative impact on their profitability and lost business and the cost to rebuild the Change healthcare system. So that's a lot of money, $1 to $2 billion. And I guess in that respect, it's a good thing that United Health Group did acquire Change Healthcare, because they've got the ability, the balance sheet, to be able to withstand that type of a loss and be able to rebuild those systems and put the money into it and fix it as quickly as any company probably could have. So that's a positive. Yet still, United Health Group said, yeah, we're going to take this big hit of $1 to $2 billion, but we're still maintaining our financial guidance for the year. So they're a big enough company to be able to absorb that kind of an expense and still have it not impact their profitability estimates for the year. So, that in and of itself says that, something isn't quite right here. If the company that is responsible for the damage caused to the industry, they feel some pain, but it's not really big enough pain to actually make them all that sick. So anyway, Nick, thank you for being with us today as we attempt to understand and untangle the many facets of this Change Healthcare cyber attack drama. And we will certainly continue to follow your reporting with HFMA as you keep us up to date with the complex and shifting financial landscape of the healthcare industry. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, it's definitely a story that we'll be keeping tabs on, and I'm sure folks throughout the healthcare industry will as well.
Thanks for listening to the Business of Healthcare podcast. To learn more about the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management and the healthcare management business degrees and certificates available to seasoned clinicians, master's students, and undergrads through the University of Texas at Dallas, go to jindal.utdallas.edu/healthcare.